Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this evening. Are you excited to be here? Yes, that's the kind of energy we want in this room. My name's Gene Murphy. I'm the community lead at Digital Irish in New York, and I get to work with some fabulous people, some of whom are on this slide. Could other Digital Irish members please stand up? Our other board members. Big round of applause for these wonderful people. They make it happen. They make it happen. They make it happen. A big thanks, as always, to all of our sponsors from the NYC Hub here, who I think is the second home for most Irish people in New York. McEntee Law, who we'll hear from in a moment. Business Post, the Department of Foreign Affairs, Granite Media, Rooney Law, and Sprintax. Now, Rooney Law, unfortunately, is not here this evening. They were going to say a few words all about the thousands of customers they've worked with and all the different law needs that you have. So please hop on their website, say we sent you, because if you need a lawyer, they're a pretty good crew. So I definitely recommend them. Not that I've needed a lawyer for a lot of things, but if I did, it would be Rooney Law. One thing we always ask, if you're hands up, who is new to the city in the last month? What a time you chose. Big round of applause. If you want to get to know everyone in the city, in the world's largest Irish business diaspora, sounds good, right? Don't fool yourself, it sounds great. Please do, sign up here, search this, connect with people, build your network. Everyone in New York, I don't know what happens across the Atlantic, but everyone wants to help everyone over here, so please do make sure that you use that. You can scan that here, and you'll see that a little later on. And please do this evening help amplify the wonderful voices of Sarah Kennedy and Aine, Mulloy, our special guests, and all the people who get to meet by using hashtag Digital Irish this evening when you're on social media. Now, it's our lightning pitches time. Normally we do a spotlight on startups, but as this is our last event of the year, I thought you were going to go with an awe. I mean, you're a tough customer. There's no two ways about it. You're a tough customer, Liam. We have one more event, which we're going to talk about a little later on, but this is our last fireside chat for the year. First up, we'd like to introduce Ryan, one of our sponsors and supporters from over the year, who's going to say a few words. Ryan, big round of applause. It's over to you.
Thank you. So my name is Ryan Helgeson. I usually look like that. I'm appearing in some fall color today due to an accident, but I'm good. I'm here from McEntee Law Group, proud to sponsor this wonderful event and organization. We practice immigration law. We specialize in startups and other complex immigration matters. So that's really what we focus on, is the harder cases. And we love to, work with individuals and companies to, meet their immigration needs. And we're very pleased to be here. Thank you.
That's great, Ryan. Thank you very much. Next up, the man with ice in his veins after that last comment, Liam Granger from Sprintax. It's over to you. Big round of applause.
Eugene. I still have 30 seconds, which is quite the challenge for someone from Cork. But my name is Liam. I work with Sprintax. You might have heard of us, use us. Yeah, our VP, Andy Keller, you might be familiar with, can't be here today. We work in the world of non-resident tax compliance for the last decade. Pretty good track record, 650 schools and corporate partners, 1 million federal tax filings, 200 nationalities serviced. So yeah, we know our stuff. If I can speak to 3 groups in the room tonight, J1s, you have a tax filing obligation, unfortunately, you might not be aware of that. We have a product called Sprintax Returns that can help you. Anyone who's employing non-residents, we can help you navigate the world of payroll compliance for them. And finally, for anyone who's investing their money overseas, be that as a retail investor or part of an employee share ownership program, we can help you if you're being taxed both in your country of residence, but also in the country where your securities are held. So if you're investing money in Switzerland, you live in the US, you're going to be taxed twice. You can get a lot of this money back, which people aren't aware of. $200 billion each year are withheld, and a lot of it is unclaimed in dividend withholding tax. We can help you in less than 20 clicks. So if you are interested, if those issues sound familiar, connect with me on LinkedIn, meet me for a pint. I'd love to talk to you. So thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And our final lightning pitch from our community champs is friend, funder, and founder. That was good, right? Come on, that was good. Mr. Alan Merriman, big round of applause.
Thanks. I kind of feel like it's a comedy show, and how do you follow that? Look, I won't dwell. Elkstone, we have the largest early stage fund in Ireland. We're very, very focused on finding the very best Irish companies, backing them, helping them scale, and in particular trying to encourage them and get them here to America. And in that regard, we think that the connectivity with the Irish diaspora is super important in terms of opening doors, compounding the network, making a real difference. So we're trying to attract capital into Ireland, and then we're trying to get that capital, that smart capital, being Irish in America, be it first generation or second generation, really helping. And in that regard, we really see what Digital Irish are doing is just super important. It's a brilliant community. I've been coming out now for a couple of years, engaging with this group, and it truly is making a difference. And we want to see it be really successful. So we're delighted to be a sponsor. We're delighted to support in any way we can. And we see it very much as a two-way thing. So really delighted with what the team here are doing and so forth. So great to be here, and thanks, Gene.
Thank you very much. This is great. I get to use this slide twice. Now, an event in New York that's slightly Irish, or mostly Irish in our case, would not and should not ever start without a blessing from Father Gareth Harganen of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Gareth, big round of applause. You're a friend of mine, Gareth Harganen.
Thanks very much, my son. Yeah, just want to reiterate what's been said about Digital Irish, an integral part really of the Irish and Irish-American ecosystem here, along with Bank of Ireland Hub. It's like our quasi-consulate in some ways, without taking away from ourselves. As many of you may know, we're just 2 blocks up the road in MetLife Building, just moved there in September, and we have Board BIA, Enterprise Ireland, Tourism Ireland, IDA, and 2 other partners there, CIE Tourism Ireland Funds, and of course ourselves the consulate. And as Dean said, of course, we're terribly important and nothing could be done without us, but it's just amazing to see how much is done by the Irish and Irish American communities here without us at all, which I think is a testament to people like Fergal, like Jean, like Gavin, like Tony here, like Rachel. All of the various strands of the Irish community here really belies the fact that we're quite small in Ireland, but here we are magnified and amplified, and always just proud to be present at any Digital Irish event, and looking forward to this evening's conversation. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Now the other use of this slide. Are you ready for one more thing before I hand the mic away? Okay. Operation Jangle Fest, December 4th. You're the first to hear it. I was that excited putting this slide together. That's a little easier to read. December 4th, save the date. We've got some great giveaways from Hannah hats and Rathborne candles. Your house will smell great, and when you're outdoors, you put on your hat, nice and warm, and that'll probably smell great as well. So big thanks to all of our friends there. We're going to be releasing tickets pretty soon for that, so please mark your calendars for that. It's the main event time. I am done. I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Sarah Kennedy. Sarah, would you like to come up here while everyone gives you a huge round of applause? And Aine Mulloy.
Thank you. It's my first time up here. Thanks for trusting in me for once. So we are very excited to have this amazing guest, Aine Mulloy from AWS. I'm going to read through some of your accomplishments so I don't miss anything. So Aine is a leader with a unique talent for solving complex problems and driving impactful change. Aine's career has been marked by her entrepreneurial spirit, strategic vision, and commitment to community building. As a former co-founder and CMO, she scaled her startup to over 200 cities worldwide, and today she serves as the lead go-to-market startup advisor at AWS's Startup Loft Accelerator, where she has conducted over 200 founder sessions to date. Aine leverages her deep expertise to connect founders with industry leaders, help them refine go-to-market strategies, and harness the power of AWS's partner ecosystem. Beyond her work with startups, Aine is a certified non-executive director, an angel investor, and an award-winning designer. She's received the IDI Design for Good Award and has delivered a TEDx talk on representation, named one of Forbes' top 100 EU female founders to follow. Aine continues to inspire as a speaker, pitch judge, and advisor across the startup ecosystem. So we are thrilled to have you, and that is quite the impressive resume, Aine.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, of course. So your journey is fascinating, super. I didn't even know myself how much there was to that until I did my research, so kudos, very impressive. I guess the first question would be, was there any early influences that kind of led you down this track?
I suppose my first foray into entrepreneurship, let's say, was when I was about 8 years old. So we lived in a very sort of typical Irish scenario where all the cousins were neighbours of each other, and our grandmother's house was just over the road and every field was a neighbour. So at a certain point we were part of the elder group of cousins, and we were therefore in charge of minding the younger cousins. So instead of doing that, we decided that we would take my aunt's co-op card, walk the few miles into town, buy a load of sweets, bag them up, and sell them at a markup to our younger siblings, neighbours and cousins. So that was my first attempt as an
family
entrepreneur.
discount?
Absolutely not. No family discounts, that was the whole point.
Good, that's why you're here. So cool. I guess moving from your startup, you as a founder, to your now leadership role in AWS, if you want to talk a bit about that and that journey, the challenges.
Yeah, sure. So I was the co-founder of what was called Girl Crew. It's now defunct, but at the time we scaled to about 200 cities worldwide and raised just over $1 million. Now this was a few years ago, so that was kind of, very difficult to do in an Irish context at the time. It was effectively a social and professional network for women, and the idea was kind of that you would meet online but actually meet up offline. So we really hit the product market fit quite early. We were doing a lot of organic growth. I think we spent about $100 in marketing full stop in the first 2 years of the company, because it was just growing by word of mouth. Someone would say, oh, I'm in Sydney, I'm in London, I'm in New York, I'm wherever. Do you have a group there? And ultimately we kind of hit that sort of critical mass and then open up a city. So we actually had a backlog of cities waiting for us to go into. It sort of hit a point where I could see the team that we had hired, unfortunately, wasn't going to be able to be the team that would bring it to scale. And that's often sometimes people will find as a first-time founder that you have great intentions. You kind of oftentimes will hire friends or family, or you get advice from an advisor to hire X individual. And you get to this certain point, but then you keep hitting the same roadblocks because you actually don't have the right people on your team to have the strategic chops, not necessarily the vision, but the actual technical ability to get you to the next point. So for me, it was kind of becoming increasingly obvious that we just weren't going to get to that next stage with the funding round that we had, with the kind of the team that we had, and we really needed to kind of push a little bit further. So there was some internal kind of debate around what we should do next, and ultimately I decided to take a step back as founder and kind of let the other two founders go forth with it. Unfortunately, COVID was kind of the final nail in the coffin for it. Obviously, you weren't able to meet your friends and family, you're not going to meet strangers. So it kind of then deviated to a fully online platform. We did an app launch, all these great things. So it was a really good initial story, I should say. But after that, I was really looking around sort of how do you explain that you're a co-founder on your CV? Like, what does that mean? Because you're always beyond the realm of your technical ability. You're HR, you're legal, you're dev, you're strategy, you're commercial, you're everything. So even though I was CMO, that doesn't mean anything. It's your company, it's your business. You should be in all functions. And that's the way it is when you're an early stage founder. So I was looking for something that would kind of put a bit of a gold stamp of a credential. I changed industry. I was previously in the marketing industry, or publishing industry as a marketing officer there. So quite a change. And ultimately I went into Accenture as an innovation design lead for 3.5 years. So that was a really good way to understand, I suppose, a more business, quote unquote, ecosystem, to really get some of the technical strategy skills behind me that I really enjoyed, and also understand how do you sell into and how do you build enterprises. So we were very much sort of the tip of the spear of innovation was the phrase that we said it, working with big household names, your Metas, your Apples, your Samsungs, oil and gas, et cetera, and you be helping their VPs and seniors, oftentimes C-suite or C-suite -1, launch into new markets, develop new products, and sell into startups. That was kind of where I got the bug for how do you actually close the gap between enterprises and startups, and how can I use my skills as a former founder to really bring some of that first-hand knowledge that a lot of the other teammates didn't have. So I ultimately ended up also designing and delivering Circular's Accelerator, which was a 6-month program for global circular economy startups selling into enterprises. And the goal of it wasn't just a kind of a really nice design, pilot, whatever. We're Accenture, we want to see the return on investment. So we were actually looking for commercial opportunities with those customers. So effectively what we were doing was we were designing innovation sprints for them, and then also opening doors into large enterprises and kind of smoothing the pathway into operationalizing and scaling those customers. So I was there for 3.5 years, incredible role, incredible job. It's the flagship for R&D and innovation in Accenture, based out of Dublin. And again, I was kind of hitting this point of what's next? A friend of mine posted a job on LinkedIn. I just pinged him. I was like, hey, what's the story with this job as a BDR in AWS? He's like, you'd be a perfect fit. Let me just get you onto the hiring manager. So did that, and honestly, within a matter of days, was kind of going through the AWS loop. I don't know if anybody's applied for Amazon before, but it's a 5 one-hour interviews back to back. It's pretty intense, and really the goal, I suppose, the philosophy that they have as an organization is that you should be better than 50% of the people that are already hired into the company. So if you don't meet that bar, you don't get hired in. They have people specifically in the hiring process called bar raisers who have done countless interviews, and their goal is to kind of keep pushing the quality up and up and up. So I was there in that role working with early stage companies across EMEA for about a year. And then earlier this year, I transferred into an engaged account manager for Irish startup. So whistle stop tour, but that's where I am now.
No, I love it. That's amazing. It sounds like you're the perfect person for the role that you're in. So the startups that you're working with are very lucky to have you. Speaking of the startups, if we have some in the room, I think just touching on some of the things you've encountered with startups that you're working with. I know you work with very impressive startups that we spoke about. So speaking a bit about that, diving into some of like the strategies that you've seen work or the challenges, things like that.
From an Irish context, I think it's quite interesting because we obviously have a very niche sort of tech-forward country that's obviously very small, but it's also strategically positioned being an English language-speaking region in Europe. Very high levels of third level education, very tech centered, and very also kind of focused on emerging industries, healthcare, life sciences, biotech, ag tech, etc. So kind of whatever industry you're in, for the most part, you will find a startup or two or more in Ireland. The other thing that's kind of interesting is kind of where we're positioned between the UK and the US. So that kind of gives us good leverage into both markets around kind of sense checking your product in Ireland, going into the UK, and then going into the US, depending on the market that you're going after. I think depending on the industry, we're seeing kind of a pretty strong trend of folks going straight to the US just because of the market size. Now, one of the challenges, or I suppose sort of pitfalls that we see companies go after a lot is they see the US as one blanket. Like, we just penetrate the US and that's it. And that's not really what we're seeing as actually how people do business here. You definitely need boots on the ground. You definitely need to go kind of state by state and even subdivide the states they're in. So people sometimes typically tend to overextend themselves into the US, and then they get burned too quickly and they need to retreat. And actually that can be quite detrimental because there's nothing worse than sort of a failed rollout in those early stages, particularly when funding is tight. So if you are thinking about penetrating the US, I would do that market research first, really qualify where is our actual end user and our end buyer, not necessarily where's the flashiest city, flag that we can kind of put a stake in the ground in, but actually where we're going to drive those sales. Because if you're not getting those sales in the early phases, the path to profitability is crucial. Particularly in Ireland, we're seeing, like, I know Elkstone are here, so we're seeing, pre-seed and seed investment deals are down. The amount that people are getting is also down. So it's typically at those kind of later stages, we're seeing larger kind of ticket sizes. Tynes is a good example. They got their 50 million Series B extension earlier this year. But for the most part, funding in Ireland is still a little bit behind. That's not to say we don't have quality companies. We do. We actually are like oversaturated in some terms in terms of quality versus impact. But what we want to see is make sure that those companies know what market they're going into, how are they getting there, what are the enterprise connections that they need to make, what are the partnerships that they need to build, what are the investment firms they need to get to know, and who is the person that can be that voice for them on the ground. You really need to spend the time here, you need to get to know the ecosystem, and you need to get to know the partners as well.
I mean, that just killed half my questions. Thank you so much. I guess another thing that would be like when things are down and not going so well or things go wrong, how do you step in and motivate or assist with that or get them back on track?
It really depends on the challenge that they have, but I think for the most part, it's always kind of coming back actually a little bit to first principles of what is your actual value prop here, and who are your actual core customers? Who's your client A versus who is the outlier that you've spent, hours or hundreds of thousands of euro or whatever chasing after, and that sale doesn't actually convert. So what we'll kind of sometimes we'll see will a customer be like, say, oh, we've had this really good conversation, the BDR said they'll get back to us. It's like, did you follow up with them? Yeah, and we haven't heard back, It's like, then stop chasing that door, because you don't have time as an early stage founder to keep throwing good money after bad. What you really need to do is understand what is our value proposition, what is the actual problem that we're solving, and not be solution led. So we see a lot of companies that will build a solution, but they have no problem. So why would anybody pay for that? Or the other thing that we see a lot is, because obviously we kind of come from a tech business, is a lot of builder-led companies. They say, we built this amazing product, it's fantastic, look at our website. I don't even know what I'm looking at. The jargon is so technologically advanced that unless you're actually a specialist in that area, you're not going to understand, which doesn't actually take into account who's buying this product. And typically there'll be some procurement instrument in the middle of it, there'll be some manager who needs to make the decision, and if they can't see in a couple of seconds what you're actually doing and navigate your website, you might as well be dead in the water. So there are some simple sort of positioning sort of criteria that you need to think about when you're looking to sell, but I think the key thing is really being very crisp on like ranking your customers and like getting that tactical. Who is the seat A? And we've got X number of those. Who is seat B? We've got X number of those. Who's seat C? We've got X number of those. What can be a really nice way to do is actually refine your value prop on seat C. And when you're getting to the point where you're gaining traction there, start to go to seat A and do that quickly. Iterate quickly, constantly iterate the design, constantly iterate the copy, constantly iterate the sales pitch. Because in the early stages, it's founder-led sales. So if you're getting to the point where it's easier to make those sales, you've probably priced your product too low, you don't have the right pricing model, or now it's time to go to A and up the ante in terms of the pricing piece. Because what you don't want to do is stay too long in the small fish. You need to use those to experiment and then jump up to the big ones.
And then with some of the ones that you've seen really stand out, and like what makes the biggest difference? Is it just what you're saying and that focusing on the end user?
The biggest difference are those that are customer obsessed and really, really know exactly who they're selling to in that organization. And particularly when you're looking at for enterprise sales, for example, there's a huge chain of command when you're selling into an enterprise. And oftentimes you might get one or two champions, depending on your product, particularly if it's a SaaS product, you might get one or two champions who are in tech teams, but they need to sell the implementation of that tool to their manager or to a procurement manager, someone higher up in the procurement chain who writes off that budget, right? So you might get one or two seats, which is great, but ultimately what you're looking to do is get a critical mass in one business function, extend to the next, extend to the next, extend to the next. So you're actually moving across the entire line of the business. What I think some startups oftentimes fail to understand is just how complex some of these organizations can be. And just because you've got an in one business function does not mean that you've won that book of business. You really need to get critical mass across the entire book to say, we actually have won this customer. So then you're looking at things like testimonials, use cases, webinars. Can you get in one-to-many? Can you get in front of their internal mechanisms? What kind of tools do they have to enable their employees around the tools that they're bringing in? And that's something that can be very powerful because it can be done in a way that suits the business. And you do need to be a little bit flexible and mold yourself to them. That's not to say you should get lost in every single customer that you're going after, definitely not. But what you want to get to a point is you're getting additional business functions using your tool, not just one, unless it's very niche and very specific. But for a typical kind of SaaS solution, you're trying to get the broad sweep, let's say. So it's kind of almost like a horizontal play as well as kind of an industry play.
Yeah, amazing. And then scaling sustainably, what's your any must-haves in that scenario?
In terms of making the business sustainable, in terms of viability?
Yeah, going global sustainably. And
yeah, I think the main thing, now is just kind of keep the teams tight and lean where you can, right? Really invest in kind of the product and ultimately getting that to a point where it can be viable. But particularly in the early stages, what you're not looking for is this kind of end perfect product. You're really looking for something that does the job. It can be quite quick and dirty, and then you can go into design and pilot phases with different teams that you're working with. Obviously, it's not something that's like hemorrhaging data and is not sort of hemorrhaging resources and isn't going to crumble as soon as they add on an extra 10 or 15 seats. But what you really need to be thinking of yourself as a founder is, how do I get myself out of certain functions as quickly as I can? Because particularly in the early stages, it'll be a founder-led sales approach. So you will be spending huge amounts of time doing that. And regardless of kind of what function you have as an early stage, whether you're CTO, CEO, CMO, you're in a sales function, full stop, you're in sales. So all of you should be able to tell the pitch, all of you should be able to sell, and crucially, all of you should be able to extend the book of business that you have. We sometimes see CTOs in particular can be very much, no, I'm only about the dev, I don't do anything else. It's like, no. Every conversation that you have, you should be selling your company, selling your product. Yes, from a different lens, but you're a sales function. That is your job ultimately. So when you're looking to scale then, you're kind of thinking about how do we build a lean model wherein we can keep all the functions going simultaneously. And there's going to be points of inflection in that. If you're not getting the sales that you need, you might need to invest there. If the product isn't going where it needs to be, you might need to invest there. And that can be done, you know, in multiple different ways through contract work, short project based, whatever the case may be. But it's really about considering, are we getting to those points where we're getting to that path of profitability as quickly and as sustainably as possible? And if you're not hitting some of those milestones, you're going to have some of those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah. And then I guess specific to your startup, Girl Crew, building community, and like, how did you go about that, and what advice do you pass down to the founders that you meet based on how well you did that?
I think for us, when we were building it, we had a very clear sort of set of principles that we were working around. We also had a very clear value proposition and a very clear understanding of who our audience were, because we were our audience. So it initially started actually on Tinder back in the day, when you could only swipe heterosexually, I don't know, is that a word? But anyway, women could only swipe on men and men could only swipe on women. So the founder changed her gender status to male, put up a little graphic kind of explaining what she was looking to do. She's like, look, I'm actually a woman, I'm single, I want to go out dancing, meet friends. Overnight, she had 100 matches. That was pure organic fluke. So she put everybody into a Facebook group, and that's what started it. So I actually joined it initially kind of less than, there was about 200 people maybe in the Dublin one. And we were very clear, we set out kind of a community guidelines of how we wanted to operate, what you couldn't post, the kinds of events that we were going to do, the kind of positioning that we were going to do, you know, where were kind of our own allegiances were going. And it just grew really, really organically. Like, there was just, people were adding their friends all the time. So ultimately we ended up closing the group, and then it kind of needed to get verified. So it was quite manual. So I was kind of suggesting to her some ways we could make it a little bit easier and sort of automate some things. But the thing that really sparked it off was one, the courts are closed in Ireland in August, I think, if I remember correctly. But anyway, as a bit of a prank, loads of us changed our Tinder profiles to pictures of Mary Robinson. I don't recommend this. This is not legal advice, TM. Anyway, we changed our profile pictures to Mary Robinson. We were all pretending to be Mary Robinson and matching with guys. And it was just a bit of crack. Like, there was no sort of bigger picture behind it. Ultimately, it went onto Reddit, as these things do, and then got picked up by a journalist. And Mary Robinson's press office ultimately had to issue a statement saying that Mary Robinson is happily married, she's not on Tinder, and they're not entirely sure what's happening. Obviously, when the former president's press office issues a statement, people get interested in that, and that just sort of blew it up overnight. And then we were all over press. We were building a brand. We were invited to ICYMI. We ultimately got invited to go to visit Facebook and Instagram. It was Facebook still at the time. I'm aging myself in the company now. To visit Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. So, we went on this kind of like roadshow. But I think the thing that was really sort of crystallized the whole underlying piece of that was that we were very, very, very super crisp on who our user was. We were very, very crisp on the messaging that we were sending out, and we were very, very crisp on not extending that too early until we were hitting that critical mass in each city. So it was probably a little bit slower or more deliberate than maybe, you could maybe automate a lot of those things now. You couldn't necessarily at the time. But what it did mean was that we had a group that was fully invested into us. I remember the first time we were going to San Francisco, our community members paid for us to go. They paid for our flights, they paid for our accommodation, they fundraised that themselves. So that tells you how bought in they were to this idea and to wanting this idea to come to fruition. So for us, it was a community-focused group. But you can still do that today, but again, they need to be crystallized around what's the idea. They need to be bought into you as a founder, and they need to see that you have their best interests at heart, that this isn't just some quick money-making scheme, that they were part of something and an idea and this kind of wave of change for women, I guess, at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't realize that about Mary Robinson. Hilarious. Speaking of automation and technology and the new world that we're in, AI and microservices, I guess with everything that's evolving so quickly, how do you see the microservices landscape changing with that?
So is it worth explaining what microservices are?
Go for it. I had to ask her, so I'm like, does everyone know, or do I just know?
So basically, microservices is a way of designing a tech product. So you have monolithic, which is kind of like everything is very tightly coupled together, and then microservices, things are starting to break out and bucket out. If you're in the early stages, do not bother with microservices. I cannot stress that enough. You do not have the time, nor do you have the resources, nor frankly should you be worried about that at the early stages. It does create obviously some technical debt that you then need to kind of go and rectify later, but really what you should be focused on is building a product that actually works and is repeatable and is scalable. Once you start to hit that point where you've got that sort of really strong investment, you're kind of moving more into an enterprise selling phase, you're much more further down the line, then you can start to decouple things. And the benefit of microservices in that sense then is kind of adds that scalability, it adds more agility, and more crucially, it adds another layer of resilience. So when you're onboarding multiple clients and they've got huge amounts of data or they've got huge amounts of customers, if one portion of your system goes down, it doesn't affect the entire thing. The problem is sometimes now, because that is sort of the trendy or modern way to design, you'll see startups jumping to that, and they'll sort of get into the little bit in the weeds of it where they actually sort of spent that time building a product that works. So my advice, and it's a personal kind of view, but you'll see it repeated across lots of people, is in the early stages, focus on a monolithic product that works, and then later when you're at the point, you can start to decouple some of the core pieces.
Yeah. And then building like tech that lasts and how like withstanding the test of time, like with everything that's changing constantly, like any tips there?
I think the core thing is just always really consider security first.
Yeah.
Really think about the user journey and what's the data that they need to be inputted. What's the most kind of minimum amount of data required at each step as well, because what you don't want to do is end up in this place where you've got a huge sort of messy warehouse of data, or even kind of got to a data lake scenario, which you shouldn't really be in the early stages, but we've kind of seen it sometimes where people just have database after database after database, and they're like, we have all this data. It's like, great. Half of it's unusable, it's not clean, it's not kind of organized in any great way. You're not actually getting any insights from it. And most crucially, you're paying to have that data just being kind of stored somewhere in the back. So what I would suggest when you're thinking about kind of building products that last is always think about the user journey. What do they actually need to go through to kind of solve the problem that you're saying that you've solved? Make sure that you solve the problem you're saying that you're going to solve. But then also think about what are the kind of the touch points and how do you kind of get them through that point as early as possible. And once you've kind of that nailed down, you can start to think about adding on features, ones that are revenue driving, ones which are a little bit more sticky, so they increase the kind of the time spent, depending on kind of the product that you have, time spent on platform, reduce churn, all those kinds of things. But again, when you're thinking about kind of from a product design perspective, you should always be thinking of like, what's the long list of features, and then ruthlessly prioritize those. So you're really kind of stepping through, how do we get them as quickly as possible to the endpoint that we've sold them to? Because now consumers are much more digitally savvy. They don't want to be a long time in places that they don't need to be or don't want to be. And there's nothing that turns the consumer off more than a platform that they can't navigate, because you only have a few seconds to retain that individual, particularly if you're selling to them, because they're looking at this product. If the UI is bad, they can't figure it out what to do. It doesn't necessarily need to be beautiful, but it needs to be navigatable. And those are two things that people sometimes get a little bit trapped in. They're like, oh, it's not this stunning, gorgeous, mature piece of tech. It's like, well, of course not. You don't have the money of a Meta. You don't have the money of a Salesforce. Not that that's very beautiful. But you don't have the money of these big corporates. But really think about myself, if I was in my end user shoes, how do I get them to that endpoint as quickly as possible? And then you can think about that later. But that sort of ruthless prioritization is absolutely crucial in the early stages.
Yeah. And then for anyone offering services on AWS, like from your perspective, what will help them stand out, advice that would help them reach their audience? And
in terms of co-selling with, or?
Yeah, on the platform.
So I guess just speaking from my own, I'm not here kind of pitching AWS, but the way that AWS works is kind of ultimately they have a suite of about 200 plus services in kind of every sort of subdivision category that you can think of: compute, analytics, Gen AI, et cetera, et cetera. From a co-sell and go-to-market perspective, we kind of have a couple of different mechanisms, let's say, that you can do that. So there's obviously all the accelerator programs, and there's different things like that. Some of them are public facing, some of them are by invitation. So depending on kind of where your company is at, you may be invited onto some of those. The other piece that we have is called AWS Marketplace, which is kind of a platform effectively for selling and buying third-party software solutions. That is a really strong proposition if you're ready for Marketplace and if you have a product where your customer is buying via Marketplace. Again, if it's not the right fit for you, personally, I wouldn't recommend necessarily going down that route. It's really about finding out, is my customer already purchasing through it? If you're doing enterprise sales, then it's likely that your customer may already be purchasing there. Healthcare life sciences is a little bit of a tricky one because obviously there's so much regulatory and compliance that goes through that. But what I would say is if you are an AWS customer, the first port of call is always your account manager, because they are the ones that's kind of a conduit into this wider ecosystem, and they'll be the ones that'll be able to open the doors for you, kind of point you in the right direction, bring the specialists that you need, get you onto the programs. It's definitely one of those, the more you ask, the more you get. So my fellow account managers will hate me for saying this, but get to the point of harassing them, because they have big books of business. But if you want to be at the top of that book of business, get involved. I would say just reach out.
Very generous with your time. And then, so I guess we had Irish Startup Week here. A lot of you were probably here, but I think the feedback that came from them is when they got here is you really do have to be physically present to get the amazing opportunity that comes from the US. And you touched on this already, but is that kind of how you would see it being?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ultimately, people want to do business with people. And I know there's kind of this product-led growth approach, which is doing well in certain industries. Certain industries, a product-led growth approach just will not work and will never work. So if you're kind of a product that's an easy buy, very easy kind of understand, doesn't need a huge amount of touch points, fine. For the most part, that's not a lot of companies. And there's quite a few limitations that we're now seeing with product-led growth approaches as well. The biggest thing, though, is that people want to get to know the people behind the business. People like doing business with sound people, and the more face time that you can get with your customers, the better. So I would always recommend, if you are, a US looking to expand into the EU looking to expand into the US, try and get some boots on the ground as early as you can, and try and make sure that that person, if they are local, is well versed in your product and really understands the ethos, the company, the value prop, and isn't just some random gun, sales gun for hire scenario. Because when you buy that rock star salesperson with the 200K plus ticket plus commission plus equity, blah, 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 your resources burn up and you may not see that return on investment. So really be very strategic on who you're hiring if it's a net new hire, or if it can, send your founders out for a little while to be those boots on the ground and actually do that networking for you.
Yeah. And you're based in Ireland, so is that the consensus of the startups, or do you kind of feel like you have to direct them towards coming over here if they want to be present? It seems like when they arrive here, sometimes they're like, oh, we don't have to come, or...
Yeah, I'd say it's a mixed consensus. Some, again, it's sort of a little bit industry by industry, but for the most part, they're keen to get out as soon as they can, because they do understand the value of a market of this size, even though, it's kind of multiple markets in one. I think it really depends kind of on who they're selling to. And again, if you're not selling at this point into the US, there's really no point in spending time here, unless you're kind of maybe on the VC circuit and looking for that additional or larger size ticket. But if you are looking to sell into it, then it is important that you spend some time here for sure, because even just building your own ecosystem is key.
Yeah. And you mentioned on this earlier that everyone within the company is a salesperson, but we kind of found, it's an Irish thing, an Irish founder thing, but we're amazing storytellers, but self-promotion is tricky. So I think we coach through all of that here, but how do you find it over there?
The words that come to mind are probably not repeatable. Yeah, I would say Irish founders tend to be a little bit more self-deprecating, tend to kind of underplay themselves, tend to sort of wait on the wings and then sort of foray. Whereas I've seen it a lot where actually Americans tend to overemphasize and overplay, and then you kind of scratch at the surface and like, there's nothing here, this is an absolute waste of time. So I think there's kind of a bit of sort of stepping into the other's, realm that should happen for sure. That being said, I do think there's value in kind of being an Irish founded company, and that does add a level of credentialization and a level of quality assurance almost in a way that you don't necessarily see in other countries. And the reason being is because Ireland is such a good incubator for tech and for talent and for organizations, that when you say you're an Irish founded company, that you have that sort of initial investment, you have that product market fit, and now you're at the selling stage, it does actually help. The other thing I would say is there's such a strong Irish community in the States that actually is relatively easy comparatively to some other countries to kind of, piggyback off groups like this or Enterprise Ireland or whatever the case may be. So it feels always a little bit awkward, but definitely reach out to people, just randomly ping people on LinkedIn. That is so effective. Honestly, it's the easiest thing you can do. And I think it's also, you need to be kind of cutting your teeth in terms of selling yourself and selling your product. And if you don't really have the chops to even do that, I would question if you have the chops to go the distance to be a founder.
Yeah, I agree. So then, What?
I feel like that's a fair thing to say.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
it's
that enough.
I mean, I think it's just a cultural thing that it's harder. But people love working with us, so that's the main thing. I guess as well, balancing local focus and expanding globally, your global mindset. Like, is there a kind of sweet spot there? Like keeping it local, but also expanding?
It depends on who your customer is. Again, really, I suppose it depends on like where are you going to find that critical mass of your customer that you can take your company to the next stage. I know we mentioned them before, but Tynes are a good example. So Owen Hinchy, the founder, is very proud of it being an Irish-founded company, and he speaks quite openly about it wanting to be a generational Irish company. Even when they're doing presentations in the US, I was just at a workshop with them earlier today, they talk about being an Irish company, which is quite interesting because I have seen other founders who will say we're a global company to kind of hide or sort of belie the fact that they're actually Irish founded, whereas they're a company that have really leaned into it. There's other companies, particularly, I know we've touched on it a few times here, but healthcare, life science, ag tech, sports tech, again, kind of coming from that sort of pedigree, let's say, of what it means to build a company in Ireland. That can be a very strong story to tell. But I guess it ultimately depends on why you're telling the story, who are you telling it to, and what's kind of the value add to them of why you kind of want to do this. Sometimes you can kind of hit a double-edged sword, I suppose, in terms of people will feel if you're, an Irish company, an Irish startup, you don't have that global aspiration, you don't have the boots on the ground in the US, you're too small, you're too this, that, and the other. And it sort of almost sets you back a little bit in your mind. So what I would really think about is crafting your story and crafting your value prop for every individual that you're talking to, and making sure that you're changing that narrative every single time. You should not be working off some sort of boilerplate template that you're just regurgitating in every single meeting. If you're doing that, you have not done the research on the individual that you're speaking to, you've not done the research on the company that you're speaking to, and you don't know your product well enough to do that. There should always be a core strand, but there should be tweaks on top of it so that you know that when you're leaving out that conversation, you can already tell I've won that deal or not. And you can tell then, okay, next time I'm going to tweak this bit, that landed, keep that, tweak this. And that's kind of the way that you start to sort of build that sales mechanism and that sales drive. And you get to the point where, hopefully, ultimately, you're closing more deals than you're losing because you've done that preparation in advance. But you should be spending a lot of time in that pre-work. It can be a little bit tedious, it can be a little bit time consuming, but it's time well spent because you're just really sort of getting the reps in. And sort of, if you think about yourself as like in a more consultative point of view, it's reps. That's how they get good. They just do it over and over and over and over again until it becomes second nature. So I think that's kind of the position that you need to take it off. It's not necessarily that Ireland is good or bad. Personally, I think there's huge strength to being an Irish company, but it's more about how do you position that story, who's listening to that story, what's their background that makes the component parts of my story interesting, and then what's that red thread through it so that everybody's left with the same kind of couple of phrases, what's that elevator pitch that we're all repeating. So my company is X, my company is Y, my company is Z, and they know that and it becomes ingrained.
Yeah. And then I guess we'll talk a bit about AWS. It has a unique culture. Do you want to talk a bit about your experience there and how you found it, and for anyone looking to get involved?
Yeah, sure. So AWS is a great place to work. I am paid, but I wasn't paid to say that. What I would say is if you're looking to work in the startup world in AWS, an interest in startups is crucial. And I know that sounds super basic, but you'd be surprised how many people want to join the team because they see it's exciting, they see all the fun stuff on LinkedIn and they want to get involved, but then they actually don't understand how startups work. They don't understand things as simple as the different funding rounds or the different mechanisms or what does go-to-market mean or the different even roles within a startup. So if that is a world that you want to get into, just do some research, get au fait with what that means, who are the big players in the market, who are the kind of the interesting investors in the market, what does Enterprise Ireland do, all these kind of relatively basic things. The thing that I personally really enjoy about it is that a lot of the people on the team are ex-founders or they have some other startup on the side, and you're actively encouraged there to be entrepreneurial. So if you're looking for a job where you can go in, your manager will hand you a load of work and you just tick the box, you're not going to get that. Every day it's up to you to kind of build your own book of business. How you do that is entirely up to you. And we're quite lucky, so I kind of sit as an account manager. I'm paired with a solution architect, so it's kind of tech and commercial combined. That being said, everybody who works at AWS needs to have a basic tech knowledge. But it does mean that we get to do some of the kind of fun stuff as well as alongside of kind of the services piece. So we're looking at things like go-to-market, we look at PR, we look at use cases, public speaking, workshops, you know, kind of different events. And it's really up to you to kind of build the org as you want and as you see fit. So we've quite a lot of autonomy, we've quite a lot of leeway, and we've very much a sort of a culture of experimentation there as well.
Amazing. And then I assume the Irish team brings their own strengths to the mix. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Irish team is quite small. There's 7 of us in. Is there 7 of us? There's 6 of us now in total. That was just my miscalculation. It's not a slight on anybody. So we have 3 solution architects. We have 2 sellers, so account managers, and then Ed O'Riordan. I was sure some people in Ed O'Riordan, that people would know him well, is our business development manager. So the way we're kind of split is we have what we call Greenfield and Engaged. And Greenfield are typically startups that are a little bit earlier on their journey. They may be kind of more the pre-seed seed stage. They're looking to find product market fit. They don't necessarily have institutional backing, or they might have Enterprise Ireland and kind of nothing further to date. That doesn't mean that they won't grow, because obviously we're keen to kind of work with companies as early as possible. Then we have what we call Engaged. So I work with a book of engaged customers. They're later stage, they're kind of typically VC backed, they already have product market fit, they're now kind of in that scaling and internationalization. They may already actually have offices, you know, internationally, particularly into the US. So our role is basically just to help them grow. Like that is kind of how we work and how we operate. So that could be by bringing in partners to run workshops, pretty much hands-on, kind of looking at different sort of things like Gen AI. It could be looking at things like go-to-market. We do a lot of investor office hours. Elkstones are kind of a good example of that. We do investor dinners and drinks and kind of a lot of ecosystem pieces as well. So I suppose it's kind of sort of a bit of a one-stop shop in lots of ways, because you obviously get the tech and the services, but there is also that kind of go-to-market and then ecosystem play as well.
Amazing. You're like so genuinely excited by it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, our team are very engaged, like very much, like we personally Slack people, we're on WhatsApp, like I'm technically on PTO, but I was at a customer workshop today. Like we are in the weeds with our customers. We know them very well, we know them very personally, and you're kind of riding the ups and downs with them then as well. So I think it's not really a job where you can just kind of clock in, clock out. I mean, we are very much sort of side by side, is kind of we're positioned as a strategic advisor. So you need to be excited by them and their product, because I'm sure you've been on the receiving end, and I've been myself as a founder, where you're across the table from someone and they could not care less. They're looking at the clock, they're just like, oh, when is this over? And that's not the feeling that you want to have when you're working with somebody, because some of the customers that we're working with are genuinely changing lives. And I mean that in a very like tangible sort of kind of trying to cure cancer way. And then some are doing such things that are so deep tech, they're just like mind blowing. So I suppose the huge range of companies that you're getting to work with is just very exciting then as well.
Yeah. So I guess one more question, then we'll do some rapid fire, so how many ever that is. But looking back, your career has been so amazing and impressive. You've done so many things. I'm sure so much more to come. But what are 2 moments that have stood out for you?
Oh God, there's quite a few, but a personal win was the IDI Design for Good Award. I come from more of a humanities background, so my dad is a lecturer in art history and social care. I did my master's in literature and publishing, so I actually never really expected to end up in the world of tech or business, but I always kind of had a hope or dream that I would kind of end up in sort of a design-led role, which is what I was doing at Accenture. And ultimately was kind of brought onto this project to design I guess the question was, how can you increase the level of Black representation in marketing in the UK? However you want to do that is up to you. So there was an organization called Brim. It's kind of Wunderman Thompson, Shell, Facebook, Unilever, a whole host of kind of large corporates behind it, all invested kind of money into this. And I was brought on as the project lead to kind of design whatever the output of that might be. We ultimately ended up kind of designing a really kind of cutting edge sponsorship program, and there's like a whole sort of mentorship role and like a huge amount of content behind it. And as I was leaving the firm, it got nominated for an IDI award, and then I'd already left the firm, but they very kindly still included my name in the submission. So that was a personal win, just because I kind of have that design element to my work. I suppose the second one, I don't even know. Giving the TEDx was pretty cool. So they just reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in giving a TEDx talk. I asked them what, and they just said whatever you want. So kind of had to cobble something together. I have a lot of public speaking experience. I've been debating since I was in college. I was one of those nerds who was debating in worlds, but that was so singularly, like, excruciatingly vulnerable, because you are in a black room. There's no other light except for a spotlight on you, so you can't even gauge audience reaction. How is this going? Like, are jokes landing? Because the stage is so far removed. So that was kind of another high that's oftentimes referenced by people that don't know me as well. Like, people will still message me about it. So I think those are two kind of personal, but honestly, there's so many in there, it's kind of difficult to choose.
Right here, right now.
This is the third.
Yay! Any final words of wisdom?
I think just go for it. I mean, there's never more exciting time than being a founder. You will never learn more. You'll never be as stressed. You'll never be as excited. You'll never be as motivated as you are when you're building something yourself and you own it yourself and you're truly fully invested into it. It's also, I've had people message, like, ask, well, it might set back my career. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You will learn more in 6 months being a founder than you will in 2 years in any large organization. I enjoy working in large organizations because I like bridging the gap, but I would definitely go back to being a founder again if I had the right idea or found the right idea. But the excitement that you have is just unparalleled. So I think if you have a bit of an idea, if you have kind of enough of a sort of a structure around you, or even if you, like, you're sort of halfway there, just jump, take the plunge, go for it, go all in, and see where it takes you.
Love it. Okay, one more for me, I promise, and then we'll open it up. But what trends, startup trends, are exciting you the most right now?
I think we were kind of I was chatting about it with Donald earlier. I think, like, actual genuine applications of Gen AI is exciting, and it's a little bit of a trite answer because obviously it's a bit of a trend and it's a hot topic and everybody's pushing it everywhere. But when you actually find a real value add example, and it's not just shoehorned in as some kind of exciting proposition, what it can do is actually transformational for organizations. So if we look at an Irish example, Sunrise, so they look at kind of bioinformatics and medical imaging. They've taken lab times down for cancer imaging from 2 weeks to 15 minutes, and some results are as quick as 2 minutes. That's hundreds of thousands of images. So when you think about what that means for a cancer patient who's waiting on lab results, that's actually life-saving. It's not just life-changing, it's life-saving. And where they're hoping and looking to go, I think, is just absolutely incredible. I'm not going to do any spoilers, that's on their PR team. But there are some really, really exciting applications of it. So I think, yeah, it's definitely still experimental, and kind of there's lots of questions around governance and data and privacy and policy and what that sort of looks like. But when you find an actual, like, worthwhile use case, it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it all sounds so exciting. So very, very cool. Right, so questions from the room? Or did I cover it all? Okay, you were first. Is that any?
I don't need my.
You don't? I don't know, okay. Go ahead.
That was brilliant. Well done.
Thank you.
I just have a quick kind of boring question. I don't know enough about Amazon Web Services, but I'm in the finance world, and it seems like you have a lot of data on all the companies you work with.
Mm-hmm.
So for startup guys, do you provide access to capital within your contacts with finance? So if you're a member of Amazon Web Services, is there an ability to get partnered with people that might want to put capital, VCs, private equity, all that stuff?
Yeah, there is. So we kind of have a couple of different ways that we typically do that. Depending on the project, we also kind of do funding ourselves, typically in the form of, like, AWS credits and things against services. But we also do sort of work with a lot of investors quite closely. So it could be a case of, like, doing an investor introduction. It could also be working with the product team behind the investment firm to refine that product and kind of get it to that path of profitability. I wouldn't say it's necessarily something that we guarantee or we kind of lead out of the gate with, but it's more sort of part of the wider proposition that we have. So when you're working with AWS, you effectively have an account team, and depending on the size of your organization, as you scale, more and more resources are kind of tagged onto that. That's a value add. It's not necessarily something that you as a company pay for, but there are sort of opportunities to be connected with VC BDs. Ed is the one for Ireland, for example. So they work very closely with all the VCs in the region. They can work on sometimes on typical projects, or kind of suggest, look, this company is really going to blow up. We can do a bit of an intro for you. And likewise, sometimes VCs will come to us and ask us to kind of, validate the veracity of the technology behind it as well.
Seems like another business line, just saying.
It's not the business line that I have the ownership of or the seniority to approve. And it's also not our core business, but it's kind of part of the wider function, yeah.
Aine, it was a fascinating story, really appreciate it. If you were to do Girl Crew again and you would pick it up where it was left off, what would you do differently, or what do you know now that would change the trajectory?
I think the key thing for us was the path to commercialization. At the time, we were kind of advised, and even by like key investors and lead investors and things like that, to focus on the community, double down on the community, double down on the community. And we got that to like such a good point of saturation that it was growing really nicely. The problem is when somebody has joined something for free and then you start adding paid mechanisms, they don't like that very much. So you really need to think about how are you going to sort of bring that in a way that feels organic and feels natural. So we did kind of have a baseline that was free, then we did like a premium membership, then we're doing like a lot of advertising and sort of paid events and different sort of mechanisms, let's say, to sort of increase the commercial viability of the company. The problem, I think, was that we were always sort of hit this sticking point because we'd built on the back of Facebook, which is a very mature product. We were effectively building on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of tech investment, and then we were building a product that didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars of tech investment. So you were asking people to migrate to a platform that wasn't as good, that didn't have the same commercial proposition, and why would I? I'm already quite comfortable here. So I think in hindsight, we didn't necessarily do the wrong thing because we took the advice that we were given and we were growing and we weren't profitable, but we were making money. But if I was to do it again, I would think much more clearly how do we get that path to revenue much faster and be slightly more aggressive about it as well.
Thank you for a great presentation. Could I ask you, how do companies find you and how do you decide which companies to work with?
So companies find, how do I go with this? So there's no barrier to entry to setting up an AWS. You effectively just create an account and then you can buy whatever services that are relevant to you. For companies to come to me, they typically need to be starting to move into that scaling or scaling phase, right? So the way it kind of works is there's a bit of a startup journey, as we call it. There's a sort of an early just builder experimental phase to kind of figure out what kind of the base services or product that you're building. And then as, to be frank, your spend increases and the product kind of increases in viability, more and more resources will start to come. That being said, the barrier to entry is pretty low. We've got a pretty big team and almost immediately you'll start to see some initial supports coming towards you proactively. If you are just starting out, I would really stress, grab onto those supports with two hands. If you see emails coming in, if you see workshops coming in, if you see webinars coming in, do attend, do get involved, because the more that you attend, the easier it is to kind of get access to those things. To get to kind of the companies that I'm working with, they're much later stage. So they're kind of already have found their product market fit, they already have VC investment, so they're much kind of further along than necessarily the early ones. But the easiest way to find it is just go to aws.startups.com, you'll find all the information there, and you'll find the entire journey as well, so you can get started. And you can start off for free. There's initial kind of entry stage credits, I think they're about 1K or, I don't know, Ed is the man to ask about greenfield credits, but there are some initial credits for free just for testing, and you can kind of continue to get those up to a certain decent amount.
Yeah. Really excellent presentation. In terms of proof of concept, basically you're going to stick with the same story, but as you go up the presentation process in terms of the account manager, get through to the next level, you obviously tweak the narrative accordingly. What other tips can you give to people who actually get to that phase and can really leverage the account manager to get you to the next stage?
In terms of as an AWS customer, is it?
Yeah.
So if you have an initial proof of concept, you're kind of beyond that phase now, and now you kind of want to get into the AWS ecosystem.
In other words, how do you get him to really be your advocate and really kind of do your work for you, but at the same time keep the person apprised and happy, and then when you get to the next phase, okay, you've got the same proof of concept, you tweak the narrative accordingly. I mean, have you seen anybody, because that's, a very small savvy company could do this, but they'd have to be very au fait and very, probably a bit slick in terms of their presentation.
So it's not necessarily about the presentation. What I would say is it's more about kind of the product at that early stage, right? So you don't necessarily need to pitch to the account manager or anything like that. So depending on kind of where you are in your journey, you'll be assigned different resources effectively. And then as your company matures, those resources will start to get more specific in one way. So you might have a dedicated kind of account manager looking after a smaller book of business, as well as then wider. So you'll start to get partner development managers or go-to-market partner development managers. So all these kind of resources start to blossom out the bigger that you get. What I would say, and I'm happy to kind of dig into your particular use case afterwards, but what I would say is if you're in the early stages, you will get inbound emails from someone, checking in on you. You can do sort of basic things like a well-architected framework review. You can then kind of look at the veracity of your product, see kind of what other services are useful for you, but really hone down on kind of what it is that you're actually building, and do kind of take the advice that they're offering. So there are like free solution architects hours, for examples. There's free workshops around different kind of parts of the business. It could be around databases, it could be around compute, it could be around Gen AI, whatever the case may be. So whatever's relevant to you and your industry. Then there's a whole host of industry resources obviously on the websites as well. So what I would say in that instance is, where are the points of entry for you? What do you need to do to get your product to the next level? And how do you kind of get your account manager, or depending on who you have, CSO or whatever the case may be, to help you plug some of those gaps? So don't be afraid to kind of reach out to them, get time booked in, get time with the solution architect booked in, and kind of do those one-to-one deep dives with them.
Thank you. So it's really focusing on problem solving, not the solution.
Yeah, the problem is the key, right? Because the solution, anybody can come up with a solution, but if you don't have a problem that it's actually solving, and more vitally, you don't have people or companies or industries willing to pay for that, you don't have a viable business.
Last question over here.
Yeah, just about the credits. I was wondering what the hit rate is. I know there's some incubators, AWS gives 1 million credits to, they get some like thousands.
Yeah, so it depends again on kind of where your company is at. It would also depend on sort of the industry that you're in, what sort of accelerator program you're going after.
And what's your rate of actually profiting from these companies with the amount of credits you give? Is quite large.
I would not be able to speak to a rate of profiting against the companies in this forum, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's fine.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. You were incredible. We give her a round of applause. And then we'd love everyone to stay for the after party, pizza and drinks out there, and then come to our Christmas party. Thank you, Anya. Thank you so much.